Hello and welcome to my channel. This is going to be a portrait of a dog, and it's also going to be interesting because I'm going to show you how you can draw a white dog with charcoal. Let's start. It's a commissioned portrait. The paper is about 9 times 12 inches. I had a faint graphite sketch in place. Now I'm just gonna go over it one more time with a black pencil, because I'm gonna be working on top of that with vine charcoal, and I don't want to lose some of the shapes or some of the lines. I'm gonna do much of the shading with vine charcoal. So the breed of the dog is golden Doodle, a cross between a retriever and a poodle. And in the intro I said that I was going to draw a white dog with charcoal. It's not exactly white, it's kind of off-white, but it's a very light colored fur. So even when the main subject is of lighter color, you can still use charcoal, and I'm going to show you how. So one way to go would be to shade the background and to create contrast between the darker background and the main subject. I didn't really want to do that. I just opted for a plain white background and a simple vignette. So I'm using a piece of vine charcoal to shade the dog's head lightly, and this is not going to remain as dark like this because vine charcoal is easy to blend and move around, as you will see. There are ways to push it in and make it a little bit darker, but you can also blend it very lightly. Right now I'm using a paper tissue. And I'm using it to push the charcoal around, and you can see how light the value is. Now in some areas I'm going to want to add a little bit more value, but still not too dark. So every now and then I will add a little bit more value, again using vine charcoal. Now, when you blend vine charcoal with a paper towel or a tissue, you will see that it blends very smoothly, but also you get a very light value. If you want to push the vine charcoal in a little bit harder and create some slightly darker marks, you can use a number of different tools. One of them is a tortillon, which I just used to draw some of the smaller shapes around the edges. Another one is a brush. A brush, especially if it's a stiff brush, will push the charcoal into the grain of the paper, and that way you will retain some of the darker values. If you want to go even darker, you can use a charcoal pencil, which is what I'm using here. A charcoal pencil, the charcoal pencils that I usually use are these Master's Touch woodless charcoal pencils. I normally use two grades, the medium and the soft. Most of the time I use the medium charcoal pencil. It's fairly easy to sharpen, and it holds a fine tip. And the soft charcoal pencil is softer and crumblier, but it's also a little bit darker. I'm going to use it for some of the darkest bits, like some of the details on the eyes, the nose and the mouth. And if I use the darkest darks with a soft charcoal pencil sparingly, I should achieve a nice range of value. Here I'm using an eraser, a precision eraser. This is the Tombow Mono Zero. to pull some lighter marks to define some of the smaller shapes within the ear, maybe some of the lighter hairs or clumps of hair which are sticking out and catching a little bit more light. Now, if you were to compare my drawing with a reference, it would still appear a little bit too dark, but that's because I still haven't added some of the darker values. Once I add my darkest values, all of these lighter values will start to appear even lighter. That's called value interaction, and that's what I'm counting on basically. My main subject will be slightly darker than the background, which is completely white. But because some of the darkest details, like the eyes, the nose, etc., are really dark, the rest of the fur will look really light in comparison with that. And that will hopefully create the illusion that we're looking at a dog with a very light fur, as it is in the reference photo. And the reference photo will be in the description as usual. Now, if you also look at the reference photo, I removed the leash, and I plan to fade the bottom portion of the dog's body and kind of create a vignette, as I normally do with most of my portraits, whether I'm drawing people or pets. As I'm drawing the eye, I started with a medium charcoal pencil because it's sharper and it's easier to draw fine details with it. But now I'm throwing in a little bit more of the soft charcoal pencil. I'm also going to have to reserve the white space for the catch light or the reflection in the eye. With these reflections, it's better to just work around them, for the simple reason that if you were to try to erase later, you could remove some of the charcoal, but you could never get it to look very bright. And if you want a lot of contrast, and if you want that catch light to look really bright, then it's better to reserve the white space and try not to push any charcoal or not to allow any charcoal dust onto it. That way it will remain very, very bright, and it will look like you will create the illusion like the eye is a smooth, round, reflective surface. Just adding some more details with a pencil eraser. Like I said, that precision eraser that I'm using is the Tombow Mono Zero eraser. Here with the other eye, we can't really see the eye, we just see a little bit of the darker value, but most of it is covered with that longer, fluffy fur. It's a very interesting looking dog. I kind of looked into some other reference photos, but they were quite a bit different than mine. So maybe the length and the texture of the fur varies a little bit with this particular breed. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to stick to my reference photo. Anyway, back to what I was saying about the eraser. I also have that kneaded eraser on the left. Sometimes I use that a little bit. Sometimes I just use it for cleaning up, and sometimes I use it for some of the finer details. But here I just found the Tombow Mono Zero more convenient. In addition to the Tombow Mono Zero, I sometimes use the Koh-i-Noor pencil eraser, which is also soft and allows you to create smaller details, but it's pretty much the same thing. Now, what else did I want to say? The texture of the fur, as you can see, I'm adding some lighter details every now and then, but in order for those lighter details to show up, first you have to establish an area of darker value. And the thing is that when you're drawing furry animals especially, you mustn't get caught up in all the details. You always have to pay attention to the larger relationships. So the right side, or the dog's left, but to our right, the right side of the dog's head appears to be a little bit darker in value, so I made that darker by adding a little bit more wine charcoal, and then with that wine charcoal I made it dark enough to be able to pull some lighter details, like lighter clumps of fur, so that they would stand out. Now as for the jaw area, or the lower jaw area, here we can see some of the darker gums, and I have to do those with a charcoal pencil. Some of them are going to be very dark, so I'm going to have to throw in a little bit of soft charcoal pencil, but I'm starting out with a medium charcoal pencil as usual when there are smaller shapes where I need to be careful. And with a medium charcoal pencil I can just draw slightly thinner and finer lines, but then I can also throw in a bit of a soft charcoal pencil to make it extra dark in some areas. And with a tortillon I did some refining of the smaller shapes and some finer blending. And now I'm going to do the tongue, which is not going to be as dark as the gum area, but it's going to be fairly dark, at least in comparison to the fur. So I used a combination of pencil and vine charcoal stick to do the tongue, did a little bit of blending, and then pulled some lighter details with an eraser to make the teeth and some of the lighter parts of the tongue stand out a little bit, and so that everything would look a bit more three-dimensional. The key thing when you're drawing a subject like this that has lighter fur is to avoid making it look flat, which is what can often happen when you have these lighter values and very subtle differences in value. The subject can often end up looking flat. What that means is that you don't have a good enough of a range of value, and that you haven't really defined enough of the value contrast between some of the lighter and darker areas. To avoid that, you always have to push yourself to try to see the difference between the lighter sides of the head and the darker sides of the head, which is why to the right on the top of the head and here to the right of the nose as well, as you will see, I will add quite a bit more value with vine charcoal first and blend that and make sure, or go over it one more time if necessary, to make sure that it's dark enough and that there is contrast between those parts of the head which are catching light and those which are further away, which are facing away from the light source. And the light source is clearly coming more from the left side, which you can see from the values on the head as well as the position of the catch light in the eye. For the nose, I had to use the soft charcoal pencil again because there are some really dark details there, like the nostril area and the part of the nose which is facing away from the light. I'm just adding some more value here around the lower jaw. I have to define the transition between the jaw area and the neck, which is why I'm adding a bit more value there. That part of the head is also a little bit further away from the light source, so it's going to be darker. This part of the neck and the upper jaw to the right is also darker. Like I said, that's the shadow area because it's facing away from the light source. And also on the neck and the chest area, as you can see, I added a few marks, like darker, stronger marks with a piece of vine charcoal to give that fur a little bit of texture. As important as the larger values are, or the larger areas of contrast are, it's also important to try to capture the texture and the appearance of the fur. And this dog has slightly longer, slightly curly fur, or at least wavy, and I'm trying to capture that. And here and there I also go in with a combination of other tools. Other than vine charcoal, I add a touch of charcoal pencil where I feel like it needs to be even darker, And I also use a tortillon to maybe push the charcoal in, and also to draw with it. You can also draw with a tortillon. The tortillon picks up a bit of charcoal, and then you can use it to draw some lighter shapes which don't need to have a clean edge. So this part of the chest and the neck area also has a little bit more shadow and a little bit more value and more texture, so I added some more of those slightly curved marks with a piece of vine charcoal. The thing with the vine charcoal is that when you apply it, it always looks like a bit of a mess first, but once you start blending, everything becomes softer, and you can always manipulate the amount of value and the shapes as well, and it just starts looking better once you apply the blending tools. But I don't really want to define the texture of the fur too much in that lower part of the portrait, because I don't really want to draw too much focus onto that part of the portrait. I'm just going to fade that bottom area, but I will make some suggestions of those larger clumps of fur on the neck and the chest area. Here I'm just making sure that I have enough contrast between the lower jaw and the neck area, but whenever I feel like maybe there's a little bit too much texture or too much contrast, I always soften it with blending tools. Here I'm using that Tombow Mono Zero extensively to refine the appearance of the fur, adding lots of these lighter marks. And I'm not just drawing white lines or lighter lines, I'm basically trying to group them together a little bit so that they look more like clumps of fur. This is not as easy as it looks. Sometimes the marks end up being a little bit too clean, sometimes they end up looking a little bit too much like white lines. So the way to avoid that is, like I said, to try to group them a little bit. But also you can always go back on top of them with a brush and soften them a little bit. That will remove a little bit of the contrast, but it will also make the fur look a little bit more fluffy and a bit softer and more realistic. But it's definitely important to pull those lighter details so that you can get both a more realistic looking fur and also to increase the range of value, because you can definitely see how I'm applying more of the pencil eraser onto some areas than others, because I just want some areas to be lighter and others to remain a little bit darker. You can also use a kneaded eraser for this, except for the fact with that with a kneaded eraser you have to keep reshaping it and remolding it so that you will be able to lift up the material. As you can see, I added some suggestions of those clumps of fur on the neck area as well, and now I'm sort of softening everything a little bit so that it would look a bit more convincing. If you want to soften it, you can also use a kneaded eraser and allow it to pick up a little bit of charcoal, basically not try to remold it and reshape it, and that way it will create shapes that don't have as much contrast. I'm doing a little bit of cleaning up here and there with the kneaded eraser, as you can see, and here I'm just putting down some finishing touches, cleaning up some of the edges. The drawing is finished and I put my signature in the bottom right corner. I hope you like the way it turned out. Don't forget to give me a like and subscribe. Check out my other videos. I have lots of content on my channel. If you want to see a lot more content and full-length videos, you should check out my Patreon. Thanks for watching and bye-bye.